Howdy, and welcome to Wise About Texas, the Texas History Podcast. This is your host, Ken Wise. Thanks so much for tuning in today for a little bit of Texas history. Things have been extremely busy at Wise About Texas World Headquarters. We had a major computer malfunction, which I hope we have remedied. It has been a nightmare to deal with, but I think we got that all fixed, and been pretty busy with the Texas State Historical Association. As longtime listeners know, I'm now the president of that association, at least through March, and we've made tremendous progress, as much progress as we've ever made in the history of the association. It's 129 years old over the last couple of years, and we're getting ready for our big annual meeting, which will be in Houston this year. The dates are February 27th through March 1st in Houston. The program has been finalized. It's an extremely good program, very diverse historical topics, all of which I think will be interesting to listeners. We're going to have another huge gala. We had a big one last year, raised more money than we've ever raised. We're going to blow it out this year and do even better, and we're going to have a very unique opportunity for a Texana auction at the end of the meeting, and this is going to be a very serious auction of Texas art and artifacts, and you are not going to want to miss it. So go to the Texas State Historical Association website. It's tshaonline.org, and sign up for that annual meeting. I'll be there, of course. We'll be speaking at the gala, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very proud to be associated with that, the Texas State Historical Association. All right, this podcast is being recorded and released on Election Day 2024. And, of course, our elections seem to get crazier and crazier. So I thought today I would release this episode and talk a little bit about a presidential election from Texas history. So let's go back to the Republic of Texas in 1841 and get wise about Texas. So the first president, as everyone knows, of the Republic of Texas was Sam Houston. He was elected in an election in 1836. The Texas Constitution, the Republic of Texas Constitution, would only allow a president to serve one consecutive term. So you couldn't run for re-election the second time, which would have been, they were 2-year terms. So he couldn't run. So Marabou Lamar ran for president, and Sam Houston fielded several different candidates, none of whom really worked out. And that's a whole nother episode. They had the candidates that Houston was supporting tended to die on the campaign trail. So it was Marabou Lamar won the election. Now, Lamar and Houston really did not like each other. I think I've mentioned on this podcast before that when the time came to inaugurate Marabou Lamar after the 1838 election, in other words, in early 1839, Sam Houston did a couple of things that were pretty funny. The first thing he did was he threw this huge party, and he ran out of firewood. And so this is the night before the inauguration. So they broke up the furniture, they pulled up the floorboards and used those for firewood. So there ended up being a lawsuit between Marabou Lamar and Sam Houston. Lamar sued Houston for busting up all the state furniture and the state floors. We'll cover that in another episode. It's a pretty good case. It was filed in Harris County, and the court records still exist. The other thing that Houston did was he insisted on giving an exit address. So he shows up at Lamar's inauguration dressed as George Washington with the wig and everything, and he proceeds to speak for about 3 hours. And during that time, Lamar got so angry and so incensed that he just handed his inaugural address to his personal secretary and stormed out of the event. And so Lamar's secretary had to give Lamar's inauguration speech. Well, fast forward, we had Marabou Lamar's term, and then we had another election. Now, Houston could run again. And you have to understand, now, you think we're in divided times in 2024. Texas politics was defined by Sam Houston in the early republic. You were either pro-Houston or anti-Houston. There weren't political parties. It was just pro-Houston or anti-Houston. He was truly a larger-than-life political figure in Texas. So Houston runs for president again. Now, this time, his opponent would be another nemesis of Houston's, David Bernett. David Bernett was the provisional president of the Republic of Texas, while Sam Houston was commander-in-chief of the military. And if you think back to the time period between February, March 1836 and the Battle of San Jacinto, Sam Houston was leading the army, which he took from Gonzales all the way to San Jacinto on what, if you didn't like Houston, you called a retreat. Certainly Bernett called it a retreat. If you did like Houston, you'd call it a tactical countermarch. In other words, Bernett and Houston were at each other's throats during the entire Texas Revolution. In fact, there's some famous correspondence from David Bernett to a letter that he sent to Houston while Houston was with the Army, saying that the people are laughing you to scorn and insisting that you fight the Mexican Army at the Colorado. Then it became the Brazos, and then he kept retreating, and Bernett was just beside himself. So Bernett really hated Houston. And so he's the political opponent running for president. Now, there was some good news about this election, and that is they didn't have social media. I'll tell you, when people say long for the good old days, we really live in the best time in world history and human history, certainly the most convenient, most advanced, all of those things. But not everything is better. And some may argue that social media has not made our political discourse more civil, to say the least. Well, back then in 1841, they didn't have social media, but they did the best that they could, and the way they did it was through the newspaper. So the candidates or their surrogates would write long letters that purported to be letters to the editor, but were really just opinion pieces, or they just flat out write opinion pieces, and these papers would publish them. But they would do it under a pseudonym. They wouldn't do it under their real name. So in this particular election, for example, Houston would write his articles or his letters under the name Truth. And Bernett had two aliases. He would write them under the name Texian or under the name Publius from ancient Rome. And the papers in those days, now I do think this was better, the papers were honest about their bias. They didn't pretend to be objective. And that's certainly an issue that we citizens talk a lot about today. But the papers would blatantly be in favor of one candidate or the other, and they would spend a lot of time supporting their candidates and denigrating the others. One of Bernett's papers during this election was in Austin, and it was the Texas Sentinel. Now, one of the things that Lamar did during the period between Sam Houston's first term and running for the second was he moved the capital from Houston to Austin. And in a previous episode, I alluded to the Archives War. I think I'm going to do a special episode just on that, when Houston would try to move the capital back from Austin to Houston. But Houston did not want the capital in Lamar's chosen town and wanted the capital back in a town that was named for him. In any event, this Texas Sentinel newspaper in Austin was a David Bernett paper. Houston was very ugly toward the town of Waterloo, renamed Austin. But as an Aggie, I'm just going to leave that alone. So here's a quote from the Texas Sentinel during this campaign about Sam Houston. Quote, "Not a single respectable man or soldier of the Army of 36 will seriously or deliberately say that General Sam Houston was a brave man, much less a general, in the eminent sense of that term." Close quote. So, and then the paper went on in that same piece to blame Sam Houston personally for the fall of the Alamo, even though he was nowhere near it, and to blame Houston personally for the massacre at Goliad. Bernett would, on the campaign trail, refer to Houston by a Cherokee nickname that Houston had received that translates to Big Drunk. Now, apparently Houston earned that name, but that's what Bernett would call Houston on the campaign trail. The reaction to that is predictable, and people were claiming that using the term Big Drunk was way too vulgar and totally inappropriate for a presidential campaign. So the Texas Sentinel addressed those allegations by saying that it's actually not vulgar because it's not name-calling. It's actually a proper name belonging to General Houston. And they also said, the paper also said, well, we're not going to use it, even though it's a proper name. And of course, during the course of this story, they repeated Houston and Big Drunk in the same sentence several times. They also printed a story, the Sentinel did, that Edward Burleson had brought Cherokee prisoners somewhere, and they don't say where. So whether this is true or not, of course, we'll have no idea. And the paper said that the Cherokees did not recognize the name Sam Houston, but they did recognize the name Big Drunk. So in classic tradition, if you repeat it over and over and over, you're going to get your message out. Well, what about Houston? He was not afraid to engage. In fact, at one point in the election, Houston referred to Bernett by an Indian word, Wetumpka, which meant hog thief. Well, that was too much, and Bernett actually challenged Houston to a duel. So think about this. We're in 1841, and one presidential candidate is challenging another to a duel. When told of the challenge, Houston's response to Bernett was, well, number one, that line is long, meaning line of people wanting to fight Houston in a duel. But he also said, Houston said, I don't fight downhill. Bernett, by the way, was not a tall man. Well, the people came on Election Day. They cast their ballots, and Houston won that election by a margin of 2-1. And it was true then, and it's true now. The name ID was just too much for David Bernett to overcome, and Houston became the third president of the Republic of Texas. So that's a little story about a contentious election in Texas history. There are many more, of course, because just like everything, Texas does it a little bit different and a little bit wilder. So I hope if you're listening to this, the day it comes out, it's Election Day 2024. So for the Getting There segment, I'm going to tell you to go to the polls. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Wise About Texas. Thanks for listening. Go follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Wise About Texas. Like and share the Wise About Texas Facebook page. And if you'd like to support the preservation and promotion of Texas history, go to patreon.com/wiseabouttexas. Thanks again for listening. Go out and do something for Texas today. And until next time, God bless Texas, and we'll see you down the road.